What if Jesus met Al Capone? In the cold heart of Depression-era Chicago, a strange kind of king holds court. He doesn't sit on a throne of gold, but in a soup kitchen bearing his own name, a theater of manufactured benevolence. Dressed in a tailored suit that screams defiance to the poverty around him, the man they call the Shadow King ladles stew into the bowls of the desperate. This is not charity, it is a performance. Every grateful glance he receives is a coin for his ego, a public laundering of a soul steeped in violence. He moves with the confident swagger of a man who owns the city's sins and believes he can also purchase its salvation, one bowl of soup at a time. Into this carefully staged drama, a new presence enters. He does not arrive with a proclamation or a challenge. He is simply there, standing in the long line among the broken and the destitute, waiting his turn. His stillness is a stark disruption to the room's forced energy. He is a mirror reflecting a truth everyone had agreed to ignore. The tired, practiced smiles on the faces of the hungry begin to fade, replaced by a raw, authentic sorrow they had learned to suppress. The loud, self-congratulatory atmosphere of the room quiets to a hum of profound and unnerving silence. The benefactor's grand performance suddenly appears hollow, grotesque, and utterly powerless. The Shadow King built his empire on a simple, self-serving creed, a mantra he repeated to himself in the dark. He was just a businessman, giving the people what they wanted. He believed that providing what society secretly craved somehow absolved him of the brutal methods used to deliver it. But the man in the line embodies a different, unyielding truth. His very being radiates the ancient law. No one can serve two masters. You cannot build a kingdom on violence and deceit and then use its profits to buy a clean conscience. The bread being offered by a blood-stained hand is not a gift. It is a judgment. The king feels it first, a chill that has nothing to do with the Chicago wind. The currency he trades in, a mix of fear and feigned adoration, is suddenly worthless. The room's energy has turned against him. He scans the crowd, his irritation growing, searching for the source of this silent rebellion. And then he sees him. A poor man, unremarkable in every way, yet whose gaze holds a weight that threatens to collapse the king's entire world. No accusation is made, no weapon is drawn, but the challenge is absolute, questioning the very foundation of his carefully constructed reality. If this encounter already makes you think, then subscribe now to this channel, because here the power of heaven confronts the thrones of earth. The Shadow King's mind is a fortress built on a single powerful lie. He is simply a man of commerce. He tells himself this in the quiet moments, a self-absolving prayer whispered to the god of capital. I am just a businessman giving the people what they want, is the cornerstone of his entire identity. He believes that society, in its hypocrisy, secretly desires the very things he provides: the liquor, the games, the escape, and that he is merely a vessel for its true appetite. In his view, the violence is just a necessary overhead, the brutal cost of doing business in a world that refuses to be honest with itself. He is not the sickness. He is a symptom, a service provider to a city of willing sinners. This conviction gives birth to his most fundamental doctrine, the brutal arithmetic of his reign. He operates on the principle that you can get much farther with a kind word and a gun than you can with a kind word alone. And this soup kitchen is the kind word, a public performance of generosity designed to soften his image and buy loyalty. The gun, however, is always present. It's in the cold eyes of his men lining the walls, in the unspoken threat that hangs in the air, a reminder that this bread is offered by the same hand that can and will take a life. For him, this is not cynicism, it is wisdom. It is the unvarnished truth of how influence is truly won and maintained in a fallen world. But the man waiting in line operates under a completely different law, a divine economy that inverts every one of the king's beliefs. His power isn't in what he has, but in what he has given up. He wears no fine suit, commands no army, and offers no material wealth. His authority comes from a place of absolute service and radical humility. While the king's power is built on making others fear him, this man's power is built on serving them. He embodies the terrifying truth that a kingdom can be built not on a throne, but on a cross, not with a sword, but with a towel and a basin of water. His silence is a sermon against the gospel of force. This is the first true confrontation, the kingdom of the seen versus the kingdom of the unseen. The Shadow King has mastered the material world. He knows the price of a politician, the loyalty of a killer, and the weight of gold. His entire existence is a testament to the idea that might makes right. Yet the Nazarene's presence introduces a reality where the first will be last and the servant will be the greatest of all. This spiritual law doesn't just disagree with the king's philosophy, it nullifies it. It suggests that all his accumulated power, all his carefully managed fear, is a currency with no value in the only ledger that truly matters. He is a king whose empire is built on sand, facing an incoming tide. For the first time, the king feels a fissure in his own certainty. It is not remorse that troubles him, but the chilling sensation of being fundamentally wrong about the nature of power itself. The man in the line hasn't said a word, yet his very being has exposed the king's life as a catastrophic miscalculation. The carefully constructed walls of his self-justification begin to crumble, not from an external attack, but from an internal resonance with a truth he has spent his life trying to bury. All the noise, the violence, and the grand gestures were just a distraction from this silent, looming verdict. Comment here. What would you do if a single gaze could unravel everything you believed about yourself? The Shadow King tries to regain his composure, forcing a magnanimous smile that feels like a mask of cracking plaster. He gestures with a grand sweep of his hand, a silent command for his men to keep the line moving, to restore the rhythm of his manufactured charity. But the room's atmosphere has curdled. The air, once thick with a mix of desperation and forced gratitude, is now heavy with a palpable, watching silence. His power, which always flowed from him like a tide of intimidation, now feels like it's being drawn out, siphoned away by the profound stillness of the one man who refuses to be impressed or intimidated. He is no longer the benefactor. He is a specimen under a microscope. His mind scrambles for its usual defenses, the well-worn justifications that have long served as the fortress for his conscience. He is a provider in a time of collapse. He offers work when there is none, escape when life is unbearable. He is a necessary evil, a product of the city's own hypocrisy. But as his gaze is drawn back to the Nazarene, an ancient truth seems to echo in the space between them, a scripture written on the air itself. Woe to you, hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. The soup kitchen, his grand monument to his own benevolence, suddenly feels cold, hollow, and utterly profane. The king's entire empire is built on the logic of the transaction. Loyalty is bought, fear is instilled, and influence is a commodity to be traded. He understands this language perfectly. But the man in the line operates with a currency the king cannot comprehend. It is not of this world. It cannot be bartered for, threatened, or controlled. This is the source of the cold dread creeping up his spine. The Nazarene's presence doesn't just question his methods, it renders his entire life's work, his entire understanding of power, completely and utterly bankrupt. The kingdom of earthly might is colliding with the kingdom of heaven, and the king feels his own domain shrinking, its foundations turning to dust. He clings to his central, self-absolving creed. He serves the people's appetites and his own ambition simultaneously. He believes he can be both a king of the underworld and a friend to the common man, balancing the two worlds on the edge of a knife. But the silent presence of the Nazarene exposes this as a fool's delusion. The spiritual law is absolute, resonating in his very bones. No one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money. He feels the two halves of his carefully constructed identity being ripped apart. The businessman and the benefactor are revealed not as two faces of a powerful man, but as warring spirits in a vessel that is about to break. The judgment is not a distant event to be feared in the afterlife. It is here. It is now. It is happening in the suffocating quiet of his own charitable stage. The king feels spiritually naked, his expensive suit offering no more protection than a shroud. His crimes are not being read from a scroll, they are being felt, a collective weight of every life his ambition has crushed. The man in the line has done nothing but stand and wait, yet in that simple act he has become the mirror in which the king sees his own damned soul. The verdict is in, delivered not with a gavel's strike, but with a gaze of unrelenting, heartbreaking truth. The Nazarene's gaze is not an accusation, it is a mirror. In it, the Shadow King does not see a challenger, but a terrifyingly clear reflection of himself. The soup kitchen, once his stage, becomes a courtroom, and the silence is the testimony. Every justification, every self-serving mantra he built his identity upon begins to feel like a lie he told a child. He remembers the cold satisfaction of a rival's fall, the chilling calculus of a life traded for territory, the hollow echo of forced respect. He has always believed that the world is a brutal place that requires a brutal hand to rule it. He is not a monster. He is what the world made him and what it secretly admires. But this mirror reflects a truth beyond the world's logic. In its light, his tailored suit looks like a funeral shroud, and the steam rising from the soup kettle seems to carry the scent of decay. The spiritual law becomes visible, etched into the very air he breathes. You are like a whitewashed tomb, beautiful on the outside, but inside you are full of death and rot. His grand performance of charity is exposed for what it is, a desperate attempt to paint over a sepulchre of his own making. The faces of the hungry in line blur into the faces of the widows his ambition has created, their silent stares a judgment more damning than any jury's verdict. The king's mind rebels. He fights back against the silence, his pride a cornered animal. This is weakness, he tells himself. This Nazarene, with his quiet poverty and gentle demeanor, is a fool who does not understand the language of power. The world doesn't run on parables, it runs on fear and force. He is a king precisely because he is willing to do what men like this are not. He provides order through strength, prosperity through ruthlessness. This is not sin, it is leadership. It is the necessary price for building an empire in a world that would otherwise descend into chaos. He is the strong man that history has always required. The divine mirror, however, is relentless. It does not care for his justifications or his philosophy of power. It simply continues to reflect, peeling back every layer of his carefully constructed persona. Another ancient truth materializes in his soul. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. Every secret handshake, every bribe passed in the dark, every life erased from the ledger, it is all here, illuminated. The weight of his hidden deeds becomes a physical pressure, a crushing force against his chest. His armor of pragmatism, once impenetrable, begins to groan and splinter. And you? Would you have the courage to look inside if you were facing Jesus? Comment below. For the first time, the Shadow King feels a terror that has nothing to do with rival gangs or federal agents. It is the terror of being fully known. The man who prided himself on his absolute control is losing the war within his own mind. The reflection in the Nazarene's eyes is no longer a king, a benefactor, or a businessman. It is a lost soul, a man whose riches have bought him nothing but a heavier chain, whose power has only dug him a deeper grave. He is staring into the abyss of his own spiritual bankruptcy, and the silence of the man in the line is the sound of his world coming to an end. The climax is not a sound, but a silence that falls as Jesus reaches the front of the line. The physical space between the king and the Nazarene collapses, and the air itself seems to hold its breath. Capone, holding the heavy ladle, feels the weight of this single impending moment. He tries to maintain his practiced mask of benevolence, to treat this man like any other beggar in his city, but the performance fails him. The silence is no longer empty. It is a presence, a force field of truth that pushes back against his entire reality. He raises the ladle, a scepter of his false charity, ready to complete the transaction. But he is no longer the one in control. He is the one being measured. As he extends the ladle, the steam rising from the soup blurs his vision, and in that haze the world shifts. The vision is not of the Nazarene, but of himself. The thin, watery stew in the ladle seems to darken, to thicken, swirling into a viscous crimson liquid. The faces of men he had ordered killed flash before his eyes, their ghostly images rising with the steam, rivals gunned down in alleyways, informants silenced forever. He sees the weeping of widows and the hollow eyes of orphans whose lives were shattered by his ambition. His soup kitchen, his monument to his own goodness, is revealed for what it is, a stage built upon a graveyard. He is not offering sustenance. He is holding a ladle of his own sin. His mind screams in rebellion. This is weakness, a trick of the light, a moment of fatigue. He is a product of this city, a necessary force in a world without rules. He brought order where there was only chaos. He provided for thousands when the government provided nothing. He is the strong hand that history has always required, the pragmatist who understands that power is the only real currency. But the spiritual law is relentless, burning through his justifications like acid. An ancient question materializes in his soul. For what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? He owns this city, but in this moment he feels the agonizing price of that conquest, the absolute bankruptcy of his spirit. For a single, eternal second, the mask of the Shadow King shatters. A flicker of pure, unadulterated terror crosses his face. It is the terror of a man who has just seen the true state of his accounts before God, and knows he is utterly ruined. The choice is clear and absolute. Drop the ladle, fall to his knees, and confess the truth of the blood he holds. Or he can deny it. He can choose the lie. He can choose his pride. His knuckles turn white as he tightens his grip on the handle. The terror is quickly smothered by a surge of rage, his oldest and most trusted shield. The jaw clenches, the muscles in his neck tense. The anger returns to mask the fear. With a grunt of pure defiance, he shoves the bowl forward, a violent, graceless act. It is not an offering, it is a dismissal, an assertion of his will against the divine. He refuses to be judged by a pauper in a breadline. He is Al Capone. He is the king of this city, and he will not be undone by a silent stare or a phantom vision. But this act of defiance is an admission of defeat. He has looked into the mirror of truth and has chosen to smash it rather than change his reflection. And you? Would you have the courage to look inside if you were facing Jesus? Comment below. Jesus takes the bowl, a simple act of acceptance that feels like a final verdict. He moves on, disappearing back into the crowd of the hungry and the forgotten, leaving the Shadow King alone in the center of his own crumbling stage. The ladle in Capone's hand feels impossibly heavy, no longer a symbol of charity, but the very instrument of his exposure. He tries to bark an order, to shatter the suffocating silence with the force of his will, but the sound that escapes his throat is a strained, hollow echo of his former authority. The performance is over. The crowd no longer sees a benefactor. They see a man who just lost a war that had no visible weapons. He turns away, stumbling back toward the wall, his mind a chaotic storm of fury and a strange, unfamiliar shame. He clings to his core belief, the bedrock of his empire. The world is weak and respects only strength. He built this city's secret heart. He gave it the vices it craved, but was too hypocritical to admit it wanted. He was not a disease. He was the cure for a society sick with its own false piety. But the face of the Nazarene haunts him, and the silence that followed their encounter now rings louder than any gunshot. His entire philosophy, his gospel of pragmatic violence, suddenly feels like the desperate rambling of a frightened child trying to justify playing with fire. The spiritual law, once a distant concept for priests and fools, now becomes a burning reality in his soul. It echoes not from a pulpit, but from within his own conscience. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Every rival gunned down in an alley, every bribe that corrupted a lawman, every family shattered by his operations. He had always seen these as mere transactions, the necessary overhead for maintaining power. Now he sees them as seeds, seeds he had sown with his own hands, and the bitter harvest was not some future damnation, but this very moment, this cold, internal rot that was beginning to consume him. His mind, a fortress of self-justification, is breached. Memories he had long buried begin to surface, not as triumphs, but as indictments. The face of a loyal man he sacrificed for convenience. The cold calculation behind a threat made to an innocent. The hollow feeling after a victory that cost him a piece of his own humanity. He had told himself this was what it took to be a king, that history is written by strong men who are not afraid to get their hands dirty. But the Nazarene's gaze held no admiration for his strength. It held only a heartbreaking clarity, revealing that his throne was built not on power, but on a mountain of spiritual debt. He feels a terror that has nothing to do with the law or his enemies. It is the terror of being irrevocably known. The encounter did not defeat him. It defined him. It held up a perfect mirror, and instead of a king, he saw a man who had gained the entire city only to lose himself completely. The power he wielded was a cage of his own making, and the bars were forged from his own sins. The foundation of his world is cracked, not by an external force, but by a single, silent question that now burns within him. What is the true price of his crown? And you? Would you have the courage to look inside if you were facing Jesus? Comment here below. The encounter is over, but the soup kitchen is forever changed. It is no longer a stage for charity, but a crime scene of the soul. Jesus did not come to debate the economics of bootlegging or the sociology of crime. He came with a silence that was a scalpel, cutting through the layers of justification to expose the rot beneath. The Shadow King, a master of controlling the external world, was left utterly disarmed by an attack on his interior. The man who could command an army of killers and bend a city to his will was brought to his knees, not by a rival, but by a truth he could not intimidate, bribe, or kill. The kingdom he built on fear was shown to be nothing more than a fragile house of cards in the quiet wind of the spirit. Capone's mind, a cornered animal, fights back with its oldest weapons, pride and pragmatism. He tells himself this Nazarene is a fool, a dreamer who doesn't understand the brutal mechanics of survival. The world is not a parable. It is a war. He brought order to that war. He was the strong hand the city needed when its supposed guardians were weak and corrupt. He was not the sickness. He was the symptom, a reflection of the city's own hypocrisy. This is how he rebuilds his shattered ego, brick by brick. He convinces himself that his violence was a necessary tool for progress, and his ambition was simply the engine of a great enterprise. He wasn't a monster. He was what history has always demanded of its kings. But a divine echo now reverberates in the chambers of his heart, a truth that dismantles every one of his defenses. His entire life's work, his meticulously constructed empire of wealth and influence, is held up against a devastating spiritual question. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? He had gained his world, the power, the fear, the adoration, the riches, but in the reflection of the Nazarene's eyes, he saw the price. A soul so shriveled and stained, it was barely recognizable as human. His grand business venture was revealed as the worst trade in history, an exchange of eternity for a fleeting kingdom of dirt and blood. The Nazarene is gone, but his presence remains, an indelible stain on the king's conscience. Capone will continue his reign, his orders will still be obeyed, and his name will still evoke terror. But the man himself is hollowed out. The silent judgment in the soup kitchen was not a final sentence, but the beginning of an internal exile. He's now a ghost haunting his own throne, a king who has seen the true measure of his wealth and found it to be worthless. This is the nature of a divine encounter. It doesn't always stop the sinner, but it always ends the illusion. And you? Would you have the courage to look inside if you were facing Jesus? Comment here below. This was never a story about a gangster. It is a story about the masks we wear and the kingdoms we build to hide from our own spiritual poverty. Every throne built on ego, every fortune built on compromise, every reputation built on a lie will one day face the silence of the Nazarene. It will be weighed, it will be measured, and it will be found wanting. The ultimate judgment is not a distant fire, but the piercing light of truth that reveals us to ourselves. While the world kneels before power, we choose to follow the truth. Subscribe so you don't miss the next confrontation between heaven and earth.